Today we are holding a panel discussion on environmental, social, and governance reporting. ESG reporting can be considered a communication tool that can provide transparency on the inner workings of an organization. We'll discuss the challenges organizations are facing in reporting and the best practices in communicating ESG data. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have Brian Gallagher from Graycor, Chris Mason from BCNA, and Kim Spahn from the American Concrete Pipe Association. Thank you all for being here. Okay, great, let's begin with our questions. Okay, as we know, vendors, contractors, including contractors, engineers, producers, etc., are all being asked to provide information on ESG policies, goals, or performance. Have you been asked to provide ESG reporting? And if so, and also with associations, are the member companies being asked for this information? And what type of projects do you find are asking for the information? Brian, let's start with you.
Sure, we definitely have been asked more and more for ESG reporting, and we're seeing that coming both from privately held companies and publicly owned companies. We don't really do much work in the public sector, but we're definitely seeing an increase in requests and requirements for ESG reporting.
Okay.
Great, great. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, so we have, and we've been voluntarily doing it for, since I've been with the company, which is about 7 years. But then more recently, we do get asked, and it's been from the private sector mainly, and it's been primarily for two reasons. One is to ensure that there's alignment and that we're just aware of the issues and our environmental impacts. And then two, customers are starting to want to quantify the life cycle impacts of buildings and things that they're working on, so construction projects. And so they need data that they can work into those, those models for the life cycle impacts of a building. And that influences their choice on construction materials.
Makes sense. How about you, Kim?
Yeah, so our larger members are seeing this, especially our publicly traded members, since it is some data that investors use to quantify the health of a company in the ESG realm. So some of our larger companies are seeing that, and they are seeing it both in the public and the private sector. Our group does sell both to the private and the public realms, and so they're seeing it both places. And then they typically will provide more information to anyone requesting that data as it's requested, so they can dive a little deeper. They actually publish a public report out that most of the folks can read, utilize, review. So I would assume a lot of public companies have that information or reports as well. And then they kind of focus a lot of that, being that ESG is very broad, they'll focus that on the things that are pertinent to their customers, such as safety, and then the diversity of their leadership. Those types of things are really their big focuses.
Yeah, real quick, building on that, we're privately held, and one of the drivers for beginning to do it in the first place was to really just model the best practices of publicly held companies. So it's definitely alignment there.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, so once you have the information, when you're trying to get the information, one of the challenges in assembling the messaging related to ESG is, who is the owner? Where in the organization does responsibility fall? Is this HR? Is this marketing? Is it compliance? Who takes ownership of this? Let's start with you, Kim.
Yeah, I've found that when asking out our members what they're doing, it's really a cross-section of the departments within those companies, depending on that segment of the ESG that they're working to report on. So it really goes to their environmental departments for admissions. It goes to health and safety if they're working on their safety numbers, and then certainly their HR department manages things like the diversity and the inclusion pieces and the equal opportunity parts of their business.
Chris, what are you finding?
Very similar. So it's distributed because right now we're reporting on 17 different areas, and they're grouped consistently with how Kim was describing it. So like 5 of them fit into the kind of the communications and social responsibility and HR space. And then we've got safety ones, and then we've got sustainability targets as well. And then it's an evolutionary process, because while the distributed model works, someone needs to be on point, right? For when, when the data is due and managing the project. And so it's been mainly in the strategy and then the sustainability area, trying to be kind of the project manager of it. And then now we're working on standardizing the methods and the frequency of the reporting, because for a while it was just annually. And then now we're looking at reporting 3 times a year, at least internally. And so that project definitely needs some attention to manage it across all the different functional areas.
Wow. Yeah, Brian, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I don't know there's a one-size-fits-all answer for every company or organization. As Kim and Chris alluded to, the information needs to be reported upon resides in different parts of the company and organization. Obviously, there's a human resource aspect, there's a safety aspect, there's other parts of the company that are responsible for capturing, gathering that data. I think it's important that there does need to be a key point person or group that is responsible for pulling that information together and then communicating that out to whoever the relevant stakeholders are.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. Okay, what type of information have you gathered or is often requested from your ESG reporting? And is there anything unusual that you've come across? Chris, we'll start with you this time.
All right. So I don't know that there's anything unusual. I would say that what I've seen is that it kind of started with a focus on environmental primarily. And so I would say the majority of it has to do, at least for our company, with emissions and environmental impacts. And then you've got kind of these other dimensions that have helped us to broaden our idea of what sustainability really even means. And it touches on things like, diversity and safety, even employees' perceptions of how important wellness is to our internal culture. I think the things that have been interesting from my point of view to measure is when we look at social impacts, we're looking at the number of employees who have volunteered 6 or more hours toward social causes. And so there weren't processes in place for that, right? So it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to report, but then all of a sudden you're realizing, okay, we don't even have a process for tracking this across nearly 3,000 employees. And so I think that's where it gets interesting. Some of the other metrics we already measured, as part of our regulatory process. And so we're just taking that data. But I think where it gets interesting is when you're mining data that you weren't mining previously, like employee attitudes, for example. Now that drives the communications requirement for a survey tool, and then if you want to move the needle, well, now you have to raise awareness or raise your game to try to influence the feedback that you get on how well you're doing.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I'd say the types of things that we've been asked to report on, obviously the diversity, equity, and inclusion component. That's been an area that we've put a lot of emphasis and focus on the last few years. Really looking at our environmental priorities and our environmental performance. And also some compliance issues, everything from ethics, anti-corruption, how we're handling data privacy, data security, do we have a recovery plan? And then we do find there's industry-specific considerations depending upon the market or what industry that the client's in. And to elaborate on some of the things that Chris talked about, a lot of the firm demographics, looking at our diversity spend. Recently, you're getting down to tier 1 and tier 2 diversity spend. The community engagement, looking for specifics on that and how we're tracking it, has been a more common question. And also on the environmental and sustainability side, looking at our power sources, what percent renewable energy, what strategies do we have in place to reduce energy consumption? How are we managing our waste streams? And obviously a lot more recent questions, more on the carbon footprint. And what we're seeing too, being a general contractor, we're being asked questions about the performance of our subcontractors and vendors. And going forward, I think that's going to be a requirement. That is an expectation of general contractors in the industry. So that's something that while as an organization, we can develop our own assessment and reporting tools, it's going to be important and really incumbent on on general contractors to really develop what some of those processes are throughout their whole supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's really good. Kim, what are you hearing?
Yeah, so I think the types of information that are being gathered are very broad, but the ones that are really important, at least to the companies, as well as the stakeholders when they're surveying out what do their stakeholders want to know more about. I'd say the top 4 that we're seeing is climate action, what's being done for climate change, the health, safety, and well-being of the employees, and then innovative and sustainable solutions, and finally, financial value creation are probably those top 4 that are important to both the company and those stakeholders. And then those are the types that are important. And then the way that they're collecting that data is one of our members is using a system called CR360. And so that's a process in which takes them a number of months to collect all that data. It's a very extensive questionnaire that they're sending out throughout all of their companies. And that system is collecting that data and helping them generate these ESG reports.
Do you think we're going to be seeing more and more of that type of collection of data through whether it's software or outside help or companies?
I think you're going to have to. Either these systems are going to provide the tools they need, or there's going to be a financial gain for other software systems to come about and be an opportunity for different companies to choose what works for their needs.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we're going to see as the demand and requirements for reporting are increasing. We are definitely seeing a rise in companies that are providing some technology solutions. There's a handful of companies out there that are doing different reporting. They have carbon calculators, and even in our industry, with some of the construction technology providers, they're looking at ways that they can gear up to help folks through the whole construction supply chain with that reporting. And the other area too is more and more owners are moving towards third-party procurement systems. And through the third-party procurement systems, most of those just in the last 2 or 3 months have added a whole ESG component to their scoring and how they rate contractors. So we're definitely seeing more of that. Those technology partners are developing educational tools. I've sat through a couple webinars and training sessions on what they're doing. And I think there's going to be technology solutions that help, but I think one of the key things that's going to be critical is we're going to need to get to a level of really kind of a harmonization and standardization and what's being asked and what's being reported. And I think a lot of the folks that are leading on the reporting side are working towards that. So there's consistency in terms of what needs to be reported on. So those of us that have to comply with it, we have some standards, so we understand exactly what information we need to track.
Yeah, that's been a concern I've heard, that the lack of consistency.
So yeah, I agree with both those statements, and I think to the extent that we can standardize, that's going to help the developers to offer a tool that that more people can use or customize based on what they're collecting. So for us, the journey has been based largely on the Global Reporting Initiative and the criteria that they use. So it's a third-party organization. It's one of those be careful what you ask for scenarios where they go into great detail about all of these dimensions and provide some real specifics for how you can measure it. And so kind of balancing that and the benefits of standardizing with kind of the practical realities of running your business and trying to enable people who are already busy to give this the time and attention it deserves. That's kind of some of the growing pains I think companies can expect to go through.
Yeah, that sounds like what's going on. Okay, so after you do have all this data, whether you like it or not, but what is your biggest challenge in compiling the results? You have all this data from all these different areas. So what are you gonna, how do you put it together? Brian, let's start with you.
Well, I think the best way to start is really just doing an assessment and really looking at the organization and seeing where you are. What we found when we first started doing this is that we were tracking, and we had a lot of the data and information and things that were being asked for. We were I was surprised with how good of a job we were doing in tracking some of this. So part of it was just doing that self-assessment, understanding where we were, gathering the information, and then also looking at some of the questions that were asked that maybe we didn't have as good data on, and really doing a little bit of a gap analysis, and then figuring out how we're going to get that data. And what we've put together is a committee that just formed that touches different parts of the organization. One, to help develop that understanding what our ESG approach is, and also to help develop an understanding of what the reporting and compliance requirements were going to be, and just engaging different stakeholders within the company to get aligned with how we're going to be reporting and capturing that information.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Chris, how about you?
Yeah, so for us, I think the flagship vehicle is our integrated report. And I would describe that as kind of a hybrid annual report and sustainability report. And we've been doing that for at least 7 years. And it's about transparency. And it evolved over the years, I think, from more of a narrative and kind of just explaining our focus areas and some of the achievements to more of a formal reporting mechanism. So back in November of 2020, we went public with a set of commitments, our 2030 commitments. And those were goals that we wanted to achieve across 17 different areas by 2030, toward the ultimate goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And so that kind of forced our hand to track that data and report that data. And the vehicle that we use is our integrated report. So one time a year, we will disclose our progress on those goals. And it becomes more quantifiable. And then what it means is that in the background, we had to determine what our incremental goals would be to reach that 2030 goal. And it becomes a large concerted effort on the parts of all of the different groups, kind of working the reporting data in there. So we just recently reported our 2021 data, and we're making progress. So I think it's by making it public, there's a higher level of accountability, and then everybody's got to work it into their priorities.
That's very true. That's very true. It's not behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, what are your members seeing that in terms of
I think like Chris mentioned earlier, where they're moving towards doing it more than once a year. Chris, you also mentioned that that is how you right now are creating your reports, is that annual report. That's the same as what our members are doing. They're doing an annual report out, but they want to move more, like Chris, you're saying, they want to move to more of a monthly collection because they want it to be more visible within the organization. It gives them a greater impact with progress towards the targets, like Chris, you were talking about. Once you put those out there in the public, now you have to move towards those targets. So they want to move their collections to something more consistent so they can see their progress and how they're doing at the site level that they're collecting that data. I think there's also a desire and a challenge to go with that, that the reporting platform would be something more similar to what we typically manage on our safety and health platforms. We've always held that in high regard, and so those systems are very mature. But the sustainability side is a little newer to our industry. Even if it's been 10 years, it's not as old and mature as like the safety reporting. So there's a desire to move that piece of the ESG reporting to maturity.
That makes sense. Okay. Now that you have the data, you know, what is the best way to communicate it? You know, you mentioned that, you know, some annual reports, but you know, what is your game plan? Is it changing? Do you think the data should be entirely in, you know, printed reports, online, electronic brochures? What's the best way to communicate the data? And well, I guess how often as well? But you have any thoughts on that or any game plans? We'll start with Chris.
So I think, you know, we followed kind of a natural evolution. It started out as a print project, like traditional annual reports, and then making it available online. And then we did away with the prints, you know, because it seemed to run counter to the objective of lowering our carbon footprints and judicious use of our resources. And so we post it online. You know, we share it broadly. And then I think probably one of the neatest things about it is that we promote repurposing the content. And so there's so much good content in this annual report, and departments can use it for their presentations, for recruiting, for town halls. And so I think the minimum requirement is publishing it on this annual basis. But then beyond that, so much effort goes into the vetting and the development of the content that repurposing it over time is a huge win when you start to get into the breadth of your stakeholder community, right? So it's you know, you've got your governmental benefit, and then you've got your community benefits, and you're even down to the residential town halls, or if you're hosting a group at a facility, trying to just leverage those key messages of being socially responsible and transparent and things like that.
Yep, that makes sense. What are you seeing, Brian?
Well, I would agree. I think taking an integrated approach, certainly different mediums, and ultimately the ESG message or the ESG approach from a company or organization is really an embodiment of the core values of the company, and the different aspects and the ways that you articulate the core values along the ESG line, that just becomes a way that you're communicating to all your different stakeholders, be it your internal employees, your client influencers, board of directors, and the community overall. So definitely taking an integrated approach. I like Chris's model there, or his term, repurposing the content. That information, as it's developed, it can be repackaged and crafted to help communicate that message to the different stakeholders in the community.
I mean, that makes sense. You spend a lot of time accumulating the information, that at least it could be used again or in many areas. Kim, what are your members doing in this sense?
I think very similar to Brian and Chris, that annual report is kind of that baseline starting place that has to be generated. But beyond that, I think our members are looking really, you have that awareness at the top level, at the leadership level, at the board level, but to really communicate that information down into the employees, and then establish KPIs within those targets, those sustainability targets, so that those employees really know what they're trying to meet. But I do really love the idea that Chris and Brian had of repurposing this data, because wow, it's so powerful. And to turn something into what we may feel like is a burden into something we can actually benefit our companies and our businesses with, it's a great idea.
Who do you think the information should be actually reaching? I guess, well, you have more than one audience, I believe. So when this is being compiled, what audiences are you thinking of and who it should be reaching? So Kim, I'll go right back to you.
Yeah, I think for us, it's pretty simple. It's all the stakeholders, which stakeholders for us is your customers, the employees. If it's a public company, it's your shareholders. So it's very broad, just like we were just talking about, of repurposing this for town hall meetings, the general public, the general community. I think everyone, I think these pieces can be used to reach just about anyone your business touches.
Okay, well, we'll go to Chris.
So I'll borrow another one from the Global Reporting Initiative playbook, right? So globalreporting.org. Earlier this afternoon, I went in and I just searched for stakeholders. And sure enough, there's a downloadable PDF that talks about quantifying who different stakeholders can be for an organization as it relates to this type of reporting. And so, yeah, internal, external, government, customers, and of course, employees. And I agree that to really make this happen and to achieve these types of ambitious goals, it's generational. It's gonna be going on after we're gone. And so planting those seeds in the employee base is huge, and working to cascade that down. And I agree. I think people at the higher levels get exposed to this kind of stuff more frequently, and making sure it reaches kind of the boots on the ground is a big priority. And then to do that in such a way that it's relatable, and it's not it's backed by the KPIs, but it needs to resonate with people to understand how it fits into the bigger picture and how we can make a difference.
Yep, sounds good. Brian, anything to add to this?
Sure. So I think looking at all the different stakeholders, and just like you would put together a marketing communication plan, developing a plan for how you're going to communicate to stakeholders. There's different things that are important to each one of those audiences. They're distinct, and really developing really a stakeholder map and how you're going to communicate and what you're going to communicate to them. I think when we talk about ESG, this is not I look at this, it's not a cyclical change. This is a structural change in terms of how we are going to do business in this industry. And I think when we look at things like ESG, we have a choice that we can look at this as something that's a burden, and we're going to take more of the compliance track, or we're going to look at this as an opportunity to do what's right for the industry, what's right for the environment and the communities. And we can look at that as something that we're going to make a strategic imperative that can help our companies and organizations better position ourselves to really meet the needs of all the stakeholders, be it the board, be it our employees, potential employees when we're recruiting, and also customers and the community overall.
You led right into my next question really well. Thanks, Brian. But what would make it easier? And actually, you've all mentioned what would make it easier for an organization to communicate how they are meeting their goals for ESG. How can the data results be easier to understand by all the different stakeholders? If you're looking at a potential new employee, is he going to understand the information? How do you present it? Any suggestions on how you would present that type of info, be it visually, or what are your thoughts? And I'll start with you, Brian.
Well, I think when you look at different people and certainly different generations, they receive information and process information different ways. So communicating it through obviously verbal things, what you're doing from a video standpoint, what you're communicating to your employees, town hall meetings, having written words and actual performance on the website and reports. So it's got to take a multifaceted, integrated communication approach to deliver the messages. And I think when I look at the ESG, while it's not completely new, where we are today, we're really, I think we're just starting the journey, and I think we're going to see a similar journey to what we really faced 20 years ago with safety. I recall filling out qualifications for clients, and the question was simply, do you have a safety program? Yes, and you check and you move on to the next question. And then today, obviously, it's a lot more detailed than that. We're looking at EMRs and TRIRs, and we're looking at specific safety plans and performance. So showing, improving what you've done, validating what you've done, and backing up with actual performance. So the communication around the performance, what the aspirational goals are, and communicating with clarity in terms of what your organization's trying to do, setting expectations, and then how you're fulfilling that.
Yeah.
Great. I think you're right on target with that. Chris.
So I think it's pretty interesting. I think what needs to happen is exactly what Brian did with his previous answer. Brian, you explained how the mindset needs to shift from it being a compliance burden to being something that's more visionary and more of a strategic initiative. And just with that little turn of a phrase, it's so important because it's all about a mindset. And I think we need to move from making this about informing people to making this about inspiring people. And I think part of that is in simplifying the message. And so while we may need to have a few pages of explanation per topic, we have to make sure we have our headlines too, and things that people can latch onto and relate to. I know in construction, we do a lot of great things with modernization and new construction, homes, hospitals, all of that. And I think where we get the most interest, or when I see people light up, it's when we talk about the buildings that we made or the bridges that we've built, and downtown Chicago, changing the skyline. And so I think working to find those moments and those phrases as communicators to try to inspire people, and making it less about compliance and more about a positive impact for people and for the planet.
Well said. That's well said. Kim, how about you?
Yeah, I think similar to what Brian and Chris have said, I'd just build on that, and that this initiative matches the values of the next generation. This is very much something that speaks to those in college all the way up into their 40s now. And so I think you have to think about how are you going to let them digest something they already want to be a part of. I think social media is a big thing that they value. Facebook's for their grandpas. So do you go on Twitter, or are there different avenues that they're getting their information from? And you have to feed that to them in a palatable way. And I think taking a 100-page annual report and putting it into bite-sized pieces that they can digest is a great way really for any of us to digest this information. Something like an infographic that can highlight, as Chris talked about, highlighting those things that are really that value that your company is providing the community is, I think it's a shift in mindset in how we communicate. People want bite-sized information, and it's an easy way to grasp what we're trying to communicate, not only to the next generation, but even the leaders today. I would say it's easier to digest in that bite-sized piece.
Very true, very true. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of that, because it's nobody's going to read the 100-page, brochure at night before bed, but yeah, I think that's essential. But any other points any of you would like to bring up?
I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity. And in preparing earlier today, what I found it fascinating is that while a lot of this feels new, it really goes back quite a ways, right? So the EPA was founded in 1970. And then if we go back to some things that happened in Stockholm, Sweden in 1972, that's when they really tried to align people around environmental protection with this broad definition of human rights and natural resources and wildlife and non-renewable resources and pollution. So it fascinates me that this feels like a wave that's taken place in the, I don't know, last 7 to 10 years, but this has been going on for a while. It's a journey. And so I think if we can bring together a lot of the principles that we talked about today, I think we can make a positive step forward.
Oh, I agree. I agree. But, well, thank all of you for being here, Brian, Chris, and Kim. It's been a great opportunity to listen to your ideas and your thoughts on what's going on with the ESG reporting and how it's being used, how it's being gathered and communicated, and where we can go from there. So appreciate your time, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kari.